He once woke up to see $10 million in his account numbers glowing against the dark of his bedroom. For a moment he felt invincible. It wasn't just money. It was proof that he'd outsmarted time. Ryan Cole had grown up believing wealth was freedom. Raised in a small Ohio town, he watched his parents trade every hour for a paycheck that barely covered bills. He promised himself he'd never live like that, trapped in the cycle of just enough. At 28, Ryan left his safe engineering job in San Francisco. He told friends he wasn't chasing money, he was chasing acceleration. Crypto was booming. Startups were minting millionaires every week. Everyone online seemed to be winning faster than reason could explain. And Ryan wanted in. He poured everything into coins, seed rounds, and leveraged trades he barely understood. Each surge made him bolder. Each profit made him deaf to risk. By 2021, his screen showed an 8-figure balance. He thought he'd escaped gravity itself. But markets don't reward speed. They test it. When the crash came, it didn't take months, it took hours. And as the numbers fell back to zero, Ryan realized he hadn't built wealth. He'd borrowed it from time, and time had come to collect. Ryan Cole grew up in a place where money meant survival, not luxury. A gray town in Ohio where winters felt longer than they should, and dreams were measured in paychecks. His father was a mechanic. His mother worked double shifts at a diner. They were proud people, not poor, just tired. Ryan used to sit by the window at night, listening to his father count the day's earnings under the dim kitchen light. Every coin that clinked into the jar reminded him how fragile stability could be. That sound of slow, tired counting stayed with him for years. He swore that when he grew up, his money would work harder than his parents ever could. He was gifted with logic and curiosity. Computers fascinated him because they offered control, a system that obeyed rules, unlike life. At 17, he built his first software app and sold it online for $400. It felt like magic. Money made while he slept. That single moment, watching his PayPal balance rise overnight, planted a dangerous belief that wealth was about speed, not patience. By 25, Ryan had a degree in computer science and a job at a tech startup in San Francisco. His salary was good, but his ambition was louder. He lived frugally, one-bedroom apartment, instant noodles, a used car, saving every spare dollar to invest. When Bitcoin crossed $10,000 for the first time in 2017, he saw it not as a bubble, but as a revolution. He read white papers late into the night, joined Reddit forums, learned about ICOs, DeFi, and leverage. Soon, his small savings turned into thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The market seemed unstoppable. His logical mind saw patterns. His emotional mind saw destiny. He started a YouTube channel sharing crypto insights. Within months, he gained a following people who saw him as a prodigy, a modern-day alchemist turning code into gold. For the first time in his life, Ryan felt admired, respected, powerful. That validation fed something deeper, the need to prove he was more than a small-town kid. In 2019, when his company offered him a promotion, he refused. He said he wanted freedom, but what he really wanted was momentum, the rush of watching numbers move in real time, the illusion of control. He quit, cashed out his stock options, and poured it all into crypto and early-stage startups. He called it high-conviction investing. That, in truth, it was a race against time, a bet that he could outpace everyone else to the top. Friends called him bold. Some called him reckless. But Ryan didn't hear warnings anymore. He heard noise. Every day, he woke up to charts, candles, predictions of a world moving at the speed of greed. He told himself he was chasing freedom, but in reality, he was chasing the silence he'd never had, the kind of peace that comes when you finally believe you've escaped scarcity. And for a while, it worked, until the same logic that made him rich began to unravel everything he'd built. By 2020, Ryan Cole had become a quiet legend in online investing circles. He wasn't loud like the influencers who flaunted Lamborghinis or beach villas. He wore hoodies, spoke softly, and shared market charts as if he were explaining weather patterns. People trusted him because he looked rational, the engineer who made millions without selling a dream. But behind the calm tone was a man addicted to velocity. Every gain felt too small, every pause a threat. When his portfolio hit 5 million, he felt relief for a day. Then the hunger returned. He told himself that 10 million was the line after that. He'd slow down. He didn't. As Bitcoin surged past $50,000, Ryan's name appeared on podcasts, newsletters, and online panels. He was the guy who'd left his job to chase asymmetric bets, a phrase he used to sound scientific about what was really just gambling with better vocabulary. He launched a private fund with a few friends, promising smart exposure to emerging crypto assets. The fund made millions within months. Everyone called him a visionary. At home, his life changed quietly. He moved into a glass-walled apartment overlooking the bay. He bought his parents a house back in Ohio the first time they'd ever owned one. When his mother cried on the phone, thanking him, he said, "It's only the beginning." And he meant it, because in his mind, he wasn't just winning. He was rewriting his family's story. But the markets don't care about stories. They care about math, fear, and timing. 3 things no one controls for long. Ryan started using leverage, borrowing against his crypto to make larger bets. It worked until it didn't. In early 2021, a single weekend of volatility wiped out a third of his gains. He told himself it was a temporary dip. He bought more, confident that he was buying the bottom. And for a while, the market rewarded him just enough to keep him believing he was right. By mid-2021, his portfolio touched $10.3 million. He took screenshots, sent them to friends, even joked online that he'd retire before 35. But inside, he felt restless. When you climb too fast, the air gets thin, and silence starts to feel like danger. He couldn't sleep without checking charts. He couldn't talk to friends who didn't trade. Every thought revolved around price movement, every heartbeat tied to market cycles. The same control he once admired in code had become chaos in his own mind. Still, he smiled on camera, gave interviews, told others to stay disciplined. It was ironic he hadn't felt disciplined in months. Then came the first cracks, liquidity issues, rumors, sudden drops. Ryan brushed them off. He'd been through dips before, but this time was different. The leverage he'd used to grow his fortune had quietly turned into a ticking bomb. And when it finally exploded, it didn't just erase numbers. It erased certainty, the illusion that intelligence could outpace risk. By the end of that year, the man who once taught others how to win was about to learn what real loss felt like. The crash didn't start with panic. It began with silence, the kind that hums before a storm. Ryan woke up one morning in November 2021 and noticed that his exchange app wouldn't load. At first, he thought it was a glitch. It wasn't. Within hours, the fund he'd leveraged into the one he'd proudly called bulletproof froze withdrawals. By noon, Bitcoin had dropped 30%. Altcoins, the ones he told investors were undervalued gems, were collapsing like dominoes. He tried to move assets, to rebalance, to do something, but every platform showed the same message. Transaction failed. By evening, $10 million had become 2. By dawn, it was less than 1. He didn't tell anyone. He sat in front of his screen as the world he built from numbers dissolved line by line. Every trade, every decision, every confident post he'd made replayed in his mind like a cruel documentary. He kept refreshing, as if staring hard enough could change the outcome. When his parents called, he didn't answer. When his investors messaged, he said everything was under control. But he wasn't under control. He hadn't been for months. A week later, the margin calls came. His loans were liquidated automatically. The fund was finished. He was finished. Ryan spent days in his apartment without opening the blinds. Food deliveries stacked at the door. The hum of his computer was the only sound left. He scrolled through old screenshots of his portfolio, as if trying to prove to himself it had once been real. The irony was brutal. He'd built his entire identity on being the guy who never panicked. Now panic was all he had left. When the calls from journalists started, he turned off his phone. The same media that once praised his strategic genius now called him reckless, arrogant, naive. And they weren't entirely wrong. But the real damage wasn't financial. It was internal. Ryan realized how little of his self-worth had survived the crash. Without the money, he didn't know who he was. The silence he'd once craved felt suffocating. In January 2022, he flew back to Ohio. He hadn't been home in years. His parents didn't ask how much he'd lost. They just hugged him. Long, wordless, grounding. For the first time in a long time, he slept. In that small house, surrounded by the simplicity he'd once sworn to escape, Ryan began to see what he'd traded away. He hadn't been chasing wealth, he'd been running from fear. The fear of being ordinary. The fear of being his father, counting coins under a weak kitchen light. Now, sitting at that same table, he understood something his father had known all along. Money isn't freedom when it owns your peace. The market had taken his fortune, but in return, it handed him something more expensive: humility. In America, people celebrate speed like it's a virtue. Move fast and break things wasn't just a startup motto, it had become a philosophy of life. Ryan used to believe in it completely. The faster he moved, the more alive he felt. Every dollar earned quickly felt smarter than one earned slowly. But when everything collapsed, he realized speed only feels like progress until it ends in a crash. He remembered sitting in his small apartment after the crash, scrolling through the same financial news that once fueled him. Every headline screamed urgency. The next 10x coin, don't miss this wave. If you're not in, you're late. It hit him, then the entire system ran on fear of missing out. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about never feeling behind. When he finally stepped outside that noise, he began to notice how other cultures treated money differently. In Japan, where he visited during a quiet sabbatical, he learned about Kaizen, the belief that improvement is not about leaps, but small, steady steps. Factories there didn't chase explosive growth. They chased precision. Employees didn't talk about getting rich. They talked about mastery. And somehow, that word felt heavier, more complete than all the wealth seminars he'd ever attended in Silicon Valley. Then he traveled through Europe, meeting small business owners who had run family bakeries or vineyards for generations. Their success wasn't measured by how fast they could scale, but by how well they could last. They reinvested profits quietly, built reserves, refused to overexpand. It wasn't that they lacked ambition, they just valued endurance over explosion. Later, in Singapore, he met an older investor who told him, "Wealth isn't about adding zeros, it's about removing worries." That line stayed with him. It reframed everything he thought he knew about success. For the first time, Ryan understood that freedom wasn't built in years. It was built across decades. He started journaling, documenting these observations like a man piecing together a new philosophy. He compared charts from Wall Street with family stories from Hanoi, Tokyo, and Rome, and the difference was startling. The Western charts always peaked and crashed. The others curved upward, slowly, patient, relentless, calm. Ryan began to rebuild his life, following those curves instead of chasing spikes. He stopped day trading. He built an index portfolio and added to it monthly. He created a small fund that helped first-generation immigrants learn about long-term investing, not speculation. He spoke less about returns and more about resilience. Whenever people asked about his past, he smiled. He no longer felt shame about losing 10 million. He felt gratitude because that loss had bought him a new kind of wealth, perspective. He once thought America was the land of freedom. Now he knew it was also the land of pressure. And true freedom didn't live in that pressure. It lived in patience, in stillness, in knowing when enough is enough. For the first time, Ryan wasn't chasing markets. He was chasing peace. And every slow day that passed without chaos felt like the richest day of his life. Years later, Ryan Cole no longer checked prices before sunrise. His mornings began with quiet coffee, a walk by the water, the kind of silence that used to terrify him. He lived in a modest apartment near Seattle now, far from the glass towers of his former life. Most people wouldn't recognize him on the street, and that was exactly how he liked it. He had rebuilt his finances slowly, cautiously, deliberately. He invested in index funds, taught part-time classes on behavioral finance, and ran a small nonprofit that helped young engineers learn how to manage money without losing their minds. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who once tried to get rich fast now taught others the power of staying still. When asked what changed him, he never mentioned the crash. He talked about time, how it heals, humbles, and redefines. He spoke about how silence, once unbearable, became his greatest teacher, and how peace, not profit, was the first real dividend he ever earned. He no longer used words like freedom or success carelessly. He believed both were dangerous when left undefined. Freedom, he said, wasn't the absence of work, it was the absence of fear. And success wasn't a number, it was a state of mind that could survive any market. Every year, he returned to Ohio to visit his parents. They still lived simply, still counted their expenses carefully. One night, while helping his father fix a broken porch light, Ryan realized something profound. The man who once tried to outpace life was now learning from the one who'd lived it patiently. It wasn't a full circle moment, it was something quieter, deeper. Acceptance. Before leaving, his father handed him the same old jar Ryan remembered from childhood, the one that used to hold their spare change. Inside was a note. It read, "Money is meant to serve, not lead." Ryan smiled. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. Back home, he placed the jar on his desk right beside his computer as a reminder of what he'd almost lost trying to win. He still invested, still believed in growth, but now he measured wealth differently. Not in millions, not in speed, but in the calm he carried through every day. Because the richest moment of his life wasn't when he made 10 million. It was when he finally stopped needing to. He didn't buy freedom. He built it, one quiet choice at a time.